What can I say about Path of Exile that hasn't already been said so many times at this point? Released all the way back in 2013, Path of Exile has been arguably one of the leading online action RPGs since its release next to Diablo. Is it really that good though? Well, I honestly have to say yes to cut things short, but if you want to stick around and see why, then I invite you to grab a drink as we talk about Path of Exile and see why you may want to play it. Path of Exile's story is a pretty interesting one. You play as one of the 7 exiled characters. An exile is known as a person who has committed a crime and is quite literally exiled from Ariath to the chaotic place known as Rayclast. Rayclast is infested with monsters, demons, murderers, and everything evil you can imagine. This is where you are tossed out to like yesterday's trash.
Take that pile of filth out with you.
Oh, Mr. Krabs, you shouldn't talk about
Path of Exile
like that.
Your goal as the exile is to escape Rayclast and solve the mysteries of the lands as you explore it. Obviously, there is more to the storyline like killing ancient gods and such, but I'll leave it there. Character creation in Path of Exile comes down to the choice of the 7 classes. The 7 exiles, if you will. There is the Templar, Shadow, Marauder, Ranger, Duelist, and Witch, with the 7th exiled character, the Scion, having to be unlocked through the game's story. Once you choose your character, you are then given the choice of what type of character you want to create. Path typically has something called leagues, in which whatever update has been added to the game is the current league, where players are given tasks to earn various permanent goodies on your accounts like cosmetics. In addition to the current league mode, there is Standard, which is what your character becomes when the league is over. Other options is Hardcore mode, where if your character dies, it drops to a standard mode character and a dedicated PvP mode. Once you make your choices, you will choose a name and then be thrown into the world of Rayclast, with the starting location being a blood-drenched beach swarming with zombies, kinda like Dead Island. Oh, that's probably not a good comparison though.
Hide your kids, grab your wife, better get out of sight. Voodoo, you voodoo.
Conquering the beach leads you to your first town hub, and from here, you'll learn the basics of the game. Things like how to move, slot new attacks that you learn, leveling up, obtain quests, and playing through the storyline through an act structure similar to other action RPGs. Most of the content is going to be played through the game's 10-act long story campaign, and yes, there is endgame content after the storyline, with even more being developed. Progression is probably the game's biggest strength, and also probably its most off-putting feature to new players. So each RPG's biggest fun factor is leveling up and getting stronger. Path of Exile has a similar skill tree to Albion Online, where each level up grants a skill point to spend in a ridiculously huge skill tree. Depending on your character and how you play, is how you will spend each skill points moving along the grid, unlocking more perks and abilities as you go. There is tons of builds online that you can follow, but for the most part, I followed my own idea of how I wanted to create my character, and for the most part, it worked just fine. Besides the skill tree, each class can also ascend to a choice of 3 subclasses eventually, and gain a smaller, more focused skill tree. The Scion only gets 1 subclass, but that's because that class is supposed to fit a more freeform playstyle. Besides the enormous skill tree and the amount of complexity in your build, there is also gear and loot. Gearing in this game is once again much like other action RPGs, where enemies will drop a smorgasbord of items upon defeating them, especially bosses, with each item having different rarities like common, magic, rare, and unique. Each item can also be further augmented or adjusted based on the currency you find. Currencies in this game are a bit different, since your currency is also what you use to augment your gear. Simple things like Scrolls of Wisdom, which is used to identify items, is considered currency, since shops will sometimes ask for your items for trade. This creates a pretty interesting dynamic where players will either choose to use their currency drops to purchase items, or use them to strengthen or change their current gear sets. Of course, this isn't much of an issue during late game when you are farming a ton, but it is worth mentioning. Anyways, back to the gear. Equipment, as I stated, can be augmented to have higher attack parameters, more armor, more shielding, different perks by using your currency items. Skills are learned by slotting skill gems into your equipment, with each skill gem having different types based on strength, intelligence, and dexterity. Each slot color represents what skill gem can be slotted into it, with further augmentation augmentations being available if you have skill gems that affect others that are linked to it. For example, if you have, say, the skill gem Fire Arrow slotted next to a linked fire support gem, then your skill will gain extra fire damage overall, increasing its effectiveness. Then there is further variables like being able to increase the quality of your skill gems, increasing the quality of your potion flasks so that healing yourself is more effective or gives buffs. There's just an incredibly high amount of depth in Path of Exile's skill tree, equipment, and gem system. It's a lot to wrap your head around, which is why it can be a bit off-putting to new players. Fear not though, because there is a method to the madness, and the more you play, the more you will become accustomed to the game's features and complexity. Luckily, the game can be played with up to 6 friends, and Path of Exile is actually on pretty much every console, except the Nintendo Switch of course, so if you like console over PC, that is an option. Depressingly though, it doesn't support crossplay, which is such a missed opportunity, but maybe in the future they will implement that feature, which, you know, by the way, they should totally try and get crossplay support, just saying.
Write that down, write that down!
In terms of other gameplay features, there is the ever so sought after endgame content that Path of Exile has quite a bit of. Endgame is quite open in PoE. Things like crafting the best equipment and perfecting your build is just stepping stones for what the game has to offer. Some will dabble in the PvP experience that Path has, where they can flex their ultimate characters in 1v1 duels, capture the flag, or the PvP open world area. Then you have heists, which give players a unique scenario where they can ally with an AI-controlled character and steal loot from a heavily guarded area. The AI-controlled characters also have their own unique stats that level up, which allow you to tackle more sophisticated and tougher heists. Then there is the map system. Oh, the map system. The mapping system is a feature that allows you to customize and create instances that you can enter to farm high-level enemies and bosses for that sweet, sweet endgame loot. Maps come in various difficulty tiers, and on top of that, the map system is related to its own feature called the Atlas of Worlds that help guide out what maps the player has completed and what maps they should be completing next. Features like the Menagerie, mining encampments, and the Labyrinth are also side activities that you can take part in. The Menagerie allows you to craft items by capturing monsters and defeating them, all with various difficulties. The mining encampment is a long winding area that you explore using a currency you find. Both the Menagerie and the mining encampments work like random events that occasionally you can take part in when the game gives you the resources needed to do so. The Labyrinth is similar to maps in which you can explore a maze-like dungeon to get various rewards at the end of it. Path also has achievements that track general progress on your accounts and offers small little challenges for players to complete. The League challenges are tied to the game's current season and are a bit harder to complete, but are similar to achievements overall. The League challenges do reward items that you keep permanently, like cosmetics, pets, or hideout decorations, which leads to the next feature, Hideouts. Hideouts are Path of Exile's player-owned housing. You can fully customize and decorate your hideouts for all the activities in the game and treat it as essentially your own personal town. It's small and menial, but it's a nice little addition for the game's plethora of activities it has, and I'm sure there is more than I'm not even aware of, so basically in summary, there is a shit ton of stuff to do in this game. I suppose the last two things I can comment on would be the prophecy system and the crafting bench in your hideouts. Prophecies are a set of different random events that can occur when you play. To invoke a prophecy, you first have to talk to Nivali and spend a silver coin to be told one. The prophecies can be small things like you will fight a specific enemy on a specific map, or something major like you will enchant a piece of equipment with a certain perk you may want. Prophecies essentially help get the game to invoke specific outcomes that you may want to help better your progression. The crafting bench in the hideout is another way you can build a piece of equipment that you want. Over the course of the game, you will find different recipes while exploring that are added to your recipe list. Once you are at a crafting bench, you can then add specific parameters to equipment you have. It does need to meet specific requirements though. The requirements are usually pretty small though, like the piece of equipment needs to be able to add an extra mod, or has to have the ability in general to add a gem socket. Okay, last thing will be the game's overall look and feel, as well as the cash shop, the good old cash shop. The game's graphics and tone are spot on. Everything is dirty looking, blood covered, disgusting, and grotesque. Basically like Diablo, and Path is essentially going for that brutal, gut-wrenching look. The graphics in general when looking up close hasn't aged well, but who is really playing an action RPG for the graphics, honestly? Music is right on the mark as well, giving of course that old school Diablo vibe, but also giving its own unique themes as well. My favorite track would probably be Lion's Eye Watch. Give it a listen. The cash shop, I can gladly say with the utmost confidence that nothing here is pay to win. This is how a free-to-play game should do their cash shop. Everything here is purely cosmetic, with the only functional item being the stash tabs that provide extra space and organization. The stash tabs do eventually become practically mandatory once you start the hardcore endgame grind, but there have been plenty of free-to-play players who never spend a dime on the game. In my eyes, the game is not pay to win. I will say that some of the cosmetic items though are pretty darn expensive, and there is loot boxes here as well, unfortunately. But at least for the most part, the cash shop is purely cosmetic. At the end of the day, guys and gals, Path of Exile is one of the shining examples that free-to-play works and continues to work well when the game is damn good. Let's get to my closing remarks. Path of Exile is completely free to play. That means all the content from the beginning to the end is completely playable for any player to jump into. No purchase required. If you like Diablo, Path of Exile is probably one of the best alternatives in the genre. Much of the atmosphere, music, and look feels very similar to that world. The game has probably some of the deepest customization in an RPG, allowing you to pretty much create anything you can imagine. Want to be an ice-slinging archer? Go for it. How about a heavy armored lightning spell caster? You got it. Of course, you may have some trouble doing certain builds, but with enough dedication, it can all work. Grinding Gear Games has created years worth of content to explore here, and more is coming with the long-awaited Path of Exile 2, which is actually just going to be an expansion to the already existing game, something other companies should take note of. Lastly, the game is on other consoles, so if you don't have a PC, you can jump on your Xbox or PlayStation and experience the fun. Just too bad it doesn't have crossplay.
Alright, I get it!
Along with deep customization and option comes a load of unbalance. It's great the game offers so much choice to the player, but clearly there will always be a meta build that players will find. Grinding Gear Games always tries to keep a semblance of balance by patching and changing how skills work, but there will never be a true balance since there is just so much customization, which unfortunately bleeds into PvP as well. If you plan to PvP, it's best to stick to the better build options unless you can truly find something that works all your own. Obviously, with the dirty, gritty, and brutal theme of the game, it was meant to mimic the golden days of Diablo. But if you aren't really looking for something like that, then Path of Exile won't be for you. Torchlight or Titan Quest has a bit of a different atmosphere if you are going for a lighter look. The game's 10-act story campaign can feel like a bit of a slog to get through your first time. Once you have cleared it once and know how to blaze through the chapters, it's not as bad, but first-time players may feel that the campaign drags a bit during the last half. Lastly, I do have to admit that the game can be a bit of a head-scratcher for new players. Imagine being completely new and trying to learn all the mechanics of the game. If you can push through and truly learn the ins and outs of PoE, the game is something amazing, but I can see where it can turn away those who want something a bit more simple. I can see why Path of Exile has stayed on the top of the charts for so long now. So much content, customization, and replayability. It's insane, all at a low cost of free. It's great to see a game thrive so much after all these years. Now all it's missing is a Deckard Cain.
You don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
Greetings, greetings. Greetings. Stay alive and listen.